Meantime, federal agents have charged two Chinese men living in the U.S. for what they call a brazen attempt to gather national security secrets on behalf of their home country. One of those suspects lives right here in Oregon and is accused of working as an unregistered foreign agent. Fox 12's Leslie Dominique joins us in the studio with more details on the charges. Leslie.
Yes, Rio, these are significant charges, with federal prosecutors accusing the two men of operating a long-running spying operation inside the U.S. Happy Valley resident Yuan Chen allegedly received detailed instructions from Chinese intelligence, including how to recruit others and how to avoid detection.
Two Chinese nationals were arrested Friday, accused of taking part in a spying operation targeting the U.S. military. One of the suspects, Yuan Chen, is a legal permanent resident in Oregon, living near the Scouters Mountain Nature Park in Happy Valley. The other, Ryan Lai, traveled from China to Houston on a tourist visa in April of 2025. According to a federal complaint filed in the Northern District of California, Chen and Lai worked on behalf of China's Ministry of State Security, also known as the MSS, the country's primary intelligence agency. The MSS is accused of overseeing and carrying out secret operations inside the U.S. aimed at collecting political, military, and technological secrets. In a statement, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, "This case underscores the Chinese government's sustained and aggressive effort to infiltrate our military and undermine our national security from within." Federal officials say Lai recruited Chen to work for the MSS in 2021. The following year, while both men were in China, they're accused of working to arrange what's called a dead drop, leaving at least $10,000 in cash inside a locker at a Livermore, California bowling alley for a U.S.-based co-conspirator acting on behalf of MSS interests. The operation involved several U.S.-based individuals, including a woman identified by investigators as Chen's wife, who was caught on surveillance footage placing the backpack in the locker. The DOJ also alleges the suspects gathered intelligence on U.S. service members and bases as part of a spy scheme. During a visit to a Navy recruitment center in San Gabriel, California, Chen is accused of taking photos of a bulletin board that contained the names, programs, and hometowns of Navy recruits. After connecting with a Navy employee through social media, federal investigators say Chen also arranged a tour of the USS Abraham Lincoln in San Diego. This 2025 photo included in the complaint allegedly shows Chen, his wife, and a Navy employee holding a child during that visit.
Now, if convicted, Chen and Lai each face up to 10 years in prison and fines of up to $250,000. Reporting in studio, Leslie Dominique, Fox 12 Oregon.